Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Conan, Evidence of Immortality, out August 19th on Napalm Records. The album has 6 tracks, 50 minutes in length, and this is the band's 5th full-length studio album. They are a British doom metal band. As far as the design goes, this album has a very interesting approach. It has these 2 songs that become the cornerstones, the pillars, the bookends, if you will, of the entire experience. The opening track, A Cleaved Head No Longer Plots, and the closing track, Grief Sequence. These 2 songs are monumental in terms of what they are within themselves, but what they offer into the overall path and journey that this album puts you on. A journey that takes you deep into this cavernous hole that just gets darker and tighter with every passing song until you reach that final track, and then there's more of an emotional bliss that comes from it, a little bit of darkness that comes from it, but it's emotionally driven. Incredible album from that perspective. I think the journey of this record is only really possible, or at least it's only possible for the listener to fully engage with it, considering these 2 tracks and the importance that they have in the overall big picture of the record. Phenomenal way of putting an album like this together. Now, as far as the sound is concerned, this is Conan sound through and through. Don't expect any variations, don't expect them to reinvent the wheel. You're coming in looking for that Conan traditional sound of grime, of sludge, of dragging you down. Very meaty, very robust, thick sound with a lot of feedback, with a lot of distortion, and that's exactly what this album is all about. On every single song, you're going to see that traditional DNA present coming through, allowing the atmosphere of the record to then kind of speak for itself. Now, within the sound of this album, there are a few instances that I felt like change ever so slightly or morphed or grew from previous albums, because I really feel like Conan is one of those bands that takes perhaps small steps with every record, but every record shows a gradual progression from where they were before to perhaps where they wanted to be. And on this album, the thing that stood out the most to me was the separation between the drum sound and everything else. It's still together, but you're also able to see the divide, the separation there. The drums on this album have a lot of strength, they have a lot of power, they ground the album really well, but they also expand the footprint of the record. Now, they come across slightly segregated from the chunkiness, from the feedback of the guitars, from the distortion of the guitars, from the slime of the guitars, and even the bass. Those are slightly separated from the drums. You feel like one is slightly ahead of the other. But this difference is not always there, or is at least not always visible. There are certain points in time throughout the songs and throughout the album where these elements start to merge, start to move, and almost become one. When they start to blend too much into one another, they start to separate once again. This movement that the drums, guitars, and bass are having, with the bass and guitars more as one solo object and the drums as a secondary solo object, the movement between these celestial corps, if you will, is really interesting, because this is what creates some sort of movement, some sort of dynamic flow within the record, because otherwise the album doesn't move anywhere. If anything, you're taking steps, and with every passing step, you're sinking deeper and deeper and deeper into the album sound, into the atmosphere of that sound, and what to the record is all about. But I love this movement, this slight movement of coming together, separating once again, coming together, always giving you a sense that they are divided from one another, but at the same time, they're pulling towards one another. Really interesting. It works really well, and like I said, it gives a lot of dynamic flow to the record. It makes the album move ever so slightly. Don't expect the album to move extremely well. That's not Conan's sound. Their sound is more of a standstill, of sinking into your seat or sinking into the sound itself, and this record is no different. But that dynamic between the drums, guitars, bass really stood out to me in terms of something slightly different from the past, or at least a little bit more defined on this record. Not to say that it wasn't there before, but I felt a little bit better crafted on this album. Easier to detect, easier to understand, easier to gravitate towards. Now, the guitars have that traditional sludge, that fuzz, that down tuning that just becomes the calling card of any Conan album. They have a very specific soundscape, they have a very specific approach. This album, from a guitarist point of view, doesn't really deviate from it, and that's totally fine. This is who they are. They're just refining few elements here and there with every passing record. And this one, perhaps they refined something else, allowing the guitars to stay a little bit more constant, a little bit more traditional, but still having this larger than life, robust experience. This record allows the sound to really navigate well. The sound is not boxed in. You don't feel like there are any barriers whatsoever. The feedback, the distortion, everything that's happening, guitar, bass-wise, and even drums to a certain extent, is able to flow freely, expand, create this large bass, this large footprint, making the songs feel more robust, giving them more texture, giving them more substance, making them slightly bigger. I would even go as far as to say epic, but not from that traditional sense, more from just a volume and size wise. But really interesting soundscape, really interesting approach, using the elements that they have at their disposal, tweaking them ever so slightly here and there in order for the album to have a uniqueness to itself, but still staying traditional with that Conan sound. And you're going to see that traditional Conan sound also represented in the vocal approach, coming deep from within the mix, feeling like it's really buried within it. It's buried within all the other instruments, all the other sound, and becoming almost part of that atmosphere that the sound itself is creating. Now, on the vocal side, I enjoyed the backing vocals. I enjoyed some of the layers that they did on the backing vocals because it allowed the voice, the tonality of the voice, to have a little bit more depth, to have a natural reverb, or unnatural reverb, if you will. Just creating a little bit more movement, creating a little bit more thickness, matching that thickness of the vocal expression, of the vocal tone, of the vocal delivery, with the thickness that already exists from the sound, from the drums, from the guitars, from the bass, everything playing a very parallel role. This is an album that it's all about creating parallels between different elements and then bringing them together and offering you them in a very simple way, or at least it feels very simple in the way in which they're being presented. All around, every album from Conan has been a better version of its previous self. This one is no different. I feel like they're evolving with every record. They're learning a little bit more about themselves and who they are and what they want to create, but they're not changing completely overnight. They're taking minimal steps in order to keep their sound, their DNA alive and well, and just tweaking a few elements that allow that sound to have more strength, to have more power, to be more direct, perhaps even a little bit easier to digest by the listener. Incredible album from a construction point of view. I like the subtle nuances that the sound offers, but most importantly, staying true to who they are on this album shows you that they're taking their own time, they're taking their own path, not necessarily looking at who's around or who's looking in. They're rather looking out. Now, as far as favorite songs are concerned, I mentioned the opening track and the closing track, so obviously those two are going to be on my favorite list. I want to start off with the Cleaved Head, No Longer Plots. First of all, I love the name of the track. Phenomenal title for this track. A track that sets everything off. It's just over the 10-minute mark, but it's a song that has an epic sound to it. Not from a fantasy, not from a symphonic metal perspective when you define those kind of tracks as epic. More from how robust it is, how big it is, how larger than life it becomes. It's a song that feels like it's getting bigger and bigger, expanding and expanding with every passing minute. It has that Conan DNA through and through. It lets you know exactly what this album, what this song is going to represent within the context of the album, what this album is going to be all about. Slow burning, grimy, heavy, a lot of distortion, this dissonant utopian sound experience that Conan always puts forward is well represented within this song. It has those backing vocals that I mentioned that work really well in order to give the vocals all around a little bit more texture, a little bit of almost an echo, if you will, making them feel like there's a reverb there. So I like that approach, I like that style. It matches really well with the sound that they've created, and this song kind of puts all the cards on the table. It lets you know that these are all the tricks that you're going to be seeing, or almost all the tricks that you're going to be seeing throughout the entire record. So get ready for it. If you enjoy this song, you're going to enjoy every single thing that's going to come afterwards. And one of the songs that comes afterwards is Equilibrium of Mankind. The build-up for this song is really interesting because it kind of simmers. It starts off, you see pieces being added, almost as a sense of growth. This song has its own growth, has its own movement, has its own momentum, and I like the fact that it takes its time to get where it needs to be. Now, as the song starts to move, as the song starts to morph, it allows other elements to come in. It allows the atmosphere to change. It allows the atmosphere to become a little bit thicker, as does the sound, with that sludginess, with that grime, with that dirt. And then as the track progresses, it's almost leaving a path of dirt behind it. That's how grimy this song comes across in terms of the movement or lack of, in terms of how it feels with the atmosphere and the soundscape that creates. It's almost like a snail, and as the snail moves, it leaves this trail behind. This song moves like a snail, but it leaves a trail of dirt in its path. Really interesting aspect from a song like this. I love how it gives you that sensation of leaving a little pieces of itself behind as it moves forward. The vocals once again come from within, working really well, something that's a trademark element of Conan, and it works really well in this song because it offers even more darkness to the song. It offers even more of that sense of going in deeper into the track itself. Once again, the backing vocals work really well in terms of adding volume, a little bit of reverb. It really creates that sense of echo, which adds to the overall growth that the track has musically. So everything coming well together, everything really merging well as one. And it has this distorted solo, I guess you could call it a distorted solo at the end that is absolutely bonkers. It's just feedback, it's just grime, it's just dirt. It has a little bit of a live vibe, which is something that's true throughout the entire record. This album really feels like a live album. But this ending, this closing of this song has such a sense of finality, of death, of ending, of just complete termination. And I love that because it echoes through space, it echoes through time. Phenomenal way of closing a track that has these sort of condiments in it. Last but not least, the final song on the album, Grief Sequence. 14 plus minutes instrumental track, phenomenal way of closing the record. The best element of this track is the organ / keyboard. I'm not quite sure what they were using, sounds like an organ to me, but it gives this ominous feel, this church ominous vibe, just pure death ending, no life in sight, you feeling completely out of control, and you feel almost that you're being taken over by this emotional darkness from within. That's how this song comes about. The most emotional driven song of the entire record. It takes you in a much different path. It takes you in a much different place. The darkness, the grime, that hole that you've been diving into from the opening track all the way until here, that hole is still there, but the journey slightly changes on this last song. The elements, the soundscape, the lack of vocals, everything about this song feels and smells and it tastes and it has a different texture to it. It's very hard to put your finger on it, but it's a song that really stands out in the crowd, and that organ is perhaps the element that makes it stand out. It changes not just the sound, but the atmosphere and how you feel towards the track. Phenomenal way of closing this record because it's a track that you're going to be talking about. It's a track that almost forces you to go back again to the beginning of the album and see if you can find clues on how did we get there. This is it, Conan, Evidence of Immortality, out August 19th on Napalm Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.